Hi, class. Welcome to our Unit 3. We're going to be covering chapters 5 and 6 in your textbook, A Framework for Marketing Management. We're going to be looking at consumer behavior, but also business buying behavior. Two pretty different concepts. We're going to spend a lot more time on consumer behavior. And while we're looking at consumer behavior, we're going to need to talk about market targeting and, well, first comes segmentation, market segmentation and targeting. Now, in lieu of having a live lecture, which given the time frame, which would be 10:30 to 11:30 p.m. on Sunday, which is my time, I'm in Eastern Standard Time. And I just don't believe that I can give a coherent lecture from 10:30 to 11:30 and then be able to carry on with my day on Monday. I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning. That would give me like 5 hours of sleep, and I'm definitely someone who needs a good 8 hours. And Sundays are usually pretty busy for me. Not to dismiss the importance of this class or your lecture. So I'm going to be recording these lectures and I'm going to post them in the course room. What I would like then for you guys is that if you do have questions or you need to get in touch with me, I'm going to leave my phone number. It's in the syllabus, but I'm also going to put it in an announcement in the course room. Feel free to text me. And then also, if we need to get a one-on-one Zoom call or some kind of meeting to help answer your questions, I am happy to do that. So we can always go that route. And I can also have an office hour sometime during the week. Happy to do that as well. And I may go ahead and just schedule that, and it would probably be like a Wednesday or a Thursday. And I could make it around noontime if that would be helpful for you guys so that you would have it during sort of your lunchtime, what would be a typical lunchtime. So I will leave an announcement for you and we'll consider a couple different ways we can do this. But let's get started talking about consumer behavior and also that business buying behavior. So, consumer behavior looks at everything that helps influence how consumers make purchases. So, it's looking at individuals, it's always also looking at groups, and it looks at how we select items, how we buy items, how we're going to use them, and then additionally, how we dispose of them. But it also applies, remember, product can be services or ideas or experience, anything that is going to help satisfy that consumer need or want. So, as consumers, and put yourselves in that position, you consume things every day, you make buying decisions. We're influenced by a lot of different things. We're influenced by our culture. It can be the culture we live in or the culture that we grew up with. We're influenced by our social circles and what's going on. And nowadays, we could even say we're influenced by social media. And then we're also influenced by personal factors, our tastes, preferences, things that we need, just how we live in general always affects how we make purchase decisions. So, when we look at those social factors that come into play with how we make decisions about buying products, we would look at our reference groups, and that could be your peers, it can be friends of yours. You may even say that a social media influencer might be considered a reference group, particularly if it's somebody that you follow in social media. Your reference group could also be coworkers, people that you hang out with. It could be cliques if you have a really close friend group. Social factors that influence consumer behavior can also definitely be family. So, if you look at your family and how you have come to be familiar with different products or services, you may look at it and say maybe 80% is due to family influence and maybe how a brother or a sister or a parent used or purchased a product. We also then can look at our roles and our status. So that could be things like a job that you might have, a position in your community. Anything like that could be considered a role or a status that is a social factor that absolutely influences how you make decisions to buy products. And so when we look at those reference groups, your membership group, your primary versus secondary, people that you hang out with a lot versus people that you hang out with a little bit, you may actually have a membership in a club or a group. There may be a group of people that you aspire to be connected with. There may be opinion leaders that you look up to. And then we may have disassociative groups. And those are, I'm not as familiar with those, but disassociative groups can be people that we want to maybe consider as part of our reference group that we don't necessarily hang out with. The other thing that we look at is influencing our consumer behavior is our personal factors. What is that age or stage in our life cycle? So I went to a baby shower yesterday, somebody in their late 20s, early 30s, and pretty much everybody there in their friend group was either had small children, infants, or was getting ready to have their first child or second child. And so, me going into that group, my children are 20 and 17. So, obviously, not in that same age or stage in the life cycle. So, talking with them about raising these children, having babies, being awake at night, all of those things, I can remember back to when I was living through that, but that's not where I am right now. So the types of products and the things that I want and need are going to be very different from the types of things they want and need. Occupation and economic circumstances also definitely play into those personal factors that influence our consumer behavior. Um, my occupation, I teach online, I teach from home, my home office, but I also own a coffee bar. So, my occupation and economic circumstances are very different than other people, and they allow me to arrange my time during the day much differently than somebody maybe that's going into an office job where they need to be in regular hours and seen in an office. Also, personality and self-concept, and then lifestyle and values. My purchase behavior is a little bit different. My lifestyle kind of it kind of revolves around the gym. I spend about 3 hours in the gym every morning, and then on some days, I even add an extra hour to that, and I go to jiu-jitsu. I like to run. I do a lot of running, and I eat very healthy. So I'm always looking at ingredients and organic products and making sure everything I eat is all natural. So that lifestyle and those values that I have definitely have an impact on how I buy products. Looking at models of consumer behavior. This is something that we really do factor in when we're doing our marketing strategies because we need to look at everything that leads that consumer to buy a product. So we start with that marketing stimuli, the products, services, price, distribution, communications, all of the things that are within our marketing mix variables. When we look then at those other stimuli, think about that macro environment when we talked about market research and we looked at economic factors, technological, political, and cultural, all of those things in that macro environment. Then when we look at the consumer, really focusing in on that consumer, we look both at the characteristics of the consumer, what we just talked about, cultural, social, personal, but we also then look at that psychology. What motivates that consumer? What kind of perceptions do they have about products or services that they're considering? What do they know? What have they learned? And then what kinds of things are in their memory that are helping contribute to those perceptions that they have? From there, we go into that buying decision process. And we're going to touch on that. We're going to go in a little deeper looking at that buying decision process because as consumers, whether the product is a bottle of water or a new car, consumers go through every stage in that buying decision process. Now, obviously, for a bottle of water, they're probably going to go through that decision process much more rapidly than if they're buying a car, but they still go through each step and each phase. And finally, they come to that purchase decision. And there are a lot of things that go into that purchase decision. You see here product choice, brand choice, dealer choice, the amount of the purchase, the timing of the purchase, how they're going to pay for that product. All of those things impact that purchase decision. So when we look at that key psychological process that a consumer goes through, motivations, looking at their, memory, what do they know about these products? And, some things that we buy as consumers, and again, you're all consumers. What are the memories you have for specific products or services? Those certainly come into play. When you have good memories, that's going to help endear that product to you. Now, if you have bad memories, you're probably not real excited about that product. You may not want to look at buying a product that has some kind of bad memory associated with it. And then products always give us emotional ties. We have some kind of emotional reaction to a product. And we must learn as we go. We have to learn how to use the product. We want to learn what the product is going to do for us. One of the things that we always look at as marketers is a product's attributes and benefits. So the attributes are all of those things that the product is or does for us. As consumers, we want to know, okay, how am I going to benefit from using that product? So that's part of that learning that needs to take place. So the consumer typically passes through these 5 stages. I told you we're going to get in a little more depth into that buying decision process that we all go through. Doesn't matter. Every single time we make a purchase, we go through each of these stages in the buying decision process. If it's a more complex product, like an automobile, we're going to spend a lot of time in each of these stages. If it's something simple like a bottle of water, we're going to go rapidly through these stages. So I'm going to just go through them using the bottle of water as the example. So your problem recognition would be, oh, I'm thirsty. You might then go on an information search. What's available to me? Do I have soda available? Do I have water available? Is there a drinking fountain? Do I have my own water? What is available to me? We're going to look at then the evaluation, all the alternatives that come into play. If I've got water nearby, that's certainly something that I will consider. How easy is it to buy something? What other options do I have? After we evaluate all of that, and things that go into that evaluation are how easy is something to acquire? What is the cost? How will I feel? What do I know about that product? What has been my experience? Have I ever tried it before? All of that's going to go through our mind as we're evaluating every option that we have. We then come time to make a decision, and we make a purchase decision. At that stage of making a decision, we may decide, oh, there's a drinking fountain. I'm perfectly happy getting water from there. it will take care of my thirst. Or looking at, I have juice available, or I have an iced coffee, or, whatever we have, we're going to finally make a decision. If we make a decision to purchase that bottle of water, we then purchase it, and then we go into that post-purchase behavior. And that may be it was a great value for the money that I spent. Oh gosh, I'm so happy that quenched my thirst. I'm no longer thirsty. That really helped my situation. Or we may say, oh man, I wish I'd have just bought the fruit juice that was available to me. So you may have some cognitive dissonance where you're unhappy with the purchase price and what you ultimately got when you bought that product, or you may be perfectly happy and say, that was a great value for the money I spent. It really made me feel good, helped my situation. I'm no longer thirsty. It was a good decision. So again, every consumer goes through this, and our job as marketers is to be available at each stage of the buying decision process so that we can provide the consumer with the information that they need and hopefully those cues that help them feel like they have made the right decision to buy our product. All right, so that's the consumer market. Let's look a little bit at that business market. So the business market is characterized by fewer but larger buyers. So when they're buying, they're spending a lot. Usually there's close supplier customer relationships. There's somebody in an organization that their sole job is to purchase for that company. There may be multiple buying influences. And so let's look at like my coffee bar for an example. I don't know if I'd call myself a professional, but I am definitely the one making those purchasing decisions. I do have multiple buying influences. So my manager at my coffee shop is going to influence, my customers are going to influence. So when customers make requests or when my manager's talking to me, I'm also going to be influenced by what's going on in the coffee market in general, with what my competitors are doing. All of those things come into play. And a great example of that is milk. So when you do coffee, milk is a huge expense. And we have customers come in. There's the pendulum is swinging a little bit, but for a while, alternative milks very, very popular. Oat milk, almond milk, soy milk. We had coconut milk for a while. We had macadamia nut milk. I get requests for hazelnut milk. So all these customers are influencing this decision on what milks I end up carrying. The pendulum has swung a little bit. So more people are now realizing these alternative milks have all kinds of additives and chemicals and stabilizers in them. So many people, unless they have some kind of dairy allergy, have swung back to just doing regular whole milk. But all of that is an influence on how I purchase for the coffee bar. There are often multiple sales calls, so I've had different salespeople from companies make multiple calls trying to get my business. There's derived demand. There's the demand is inelastic. So, if something changes, I still have to buy. So, when we talked about the tariffs, the cost of coffee went up, but I still had to buy that coffee. And demand fluctuates. For a while there, we had sort of lower sales. Lately, a lot of students are studying for finals and they use the coffee bar, and we've been crazy, wildly busy. So fluctuating demand, it's really wreaked havoc on my inventory and how we order things. We've also got my daughter manages the coffee bar for me, and she's great with making drinks, and she's got some really great, delicious drinks. If you look at our Instagram page, Wired Coffee Bar, we have all kinds of beautiful drinks. And so we've seen a real surge in customers demanding those drinks. And one of them is a blueberry muffin latte. And we ran out of blueberry puree, couldn't get any in when we really needed it for the busy weekend. So ended up making my own blueberry puree for that. And then we also have sometimes with business markets, you can have geographically concentrated buyers where the buying center for a company is in one location. So I believe that we have McKee Foods here in my backyard, Little Debbie Snack Cakes. The headquarters is here, and I believe the buying decision is concentrated here, even though they do have factories in other states. And then that purchasing is done direct between the company and the seller of the products. So a little bit of nuances that make business markets a bit different than consumer markets. And there's three different kinds of buying situations in business. You have a straight rebuy where you're just repurchasing those things. I do that a lot for the coffee bar. So there's a website where I get most of my products from, like paper products and things, and I can go in and just do a straight rebuy of those products. I can do a modified where I'm changing up the order quantities, or I may switch out and order a new or different product. And then you have a new task where you're adding something new or doing something differently. And so you need typically you're going to need more information. You might need the help of a sales rep. You might need some education on a product or service if you're doing something new that you've never done before. And that buying center has a lot of different people involved in it. So you're going to have the initiator. For me, it's like the customers sometimes initiate the types of things we buy. You have the users, that might be my baristas. Influencers could be a mixture of both of those. Decider and approver and buyer and gatekeeper in my situation is me. I'm all four of those. But in other organizations, you may have people that decide on what gets bought, but then you have the people that actually have to approve it. And then there may be another department that buys it or pays for it. And a lot of times there are gatekeepers to that as well, where they may set some criteria around how things can be bought. I work for a university that only when we fly or travel, we're only allowed to use United. So that's sort of the gatekeeping part of it. And I live in the South, so I live in Delta territory. So it's always harder for me to find a United flight, and typically it can be more expensive. So part of that gatekeeping process is I called up the provost and had a talk with her about it. And so she authorized that whenever I fly for the university, I can use Delta instead of the mandatory United. Targeting firms and buying centers, oftentimes you want to look at who are those major decision participants, what decisions do they influence, and what evaluation criteria do they use. So if you're a sales rep for a company and you're calling on a manufacturing facility, these are some of the questions that you will need to determine and then figure out how you go about getting into the organization, who you need to talk to, and what you need to do. What are the criteria? So that will help you uncover and educate yourself as you prepare how you're going to present your products or services to that organization. So, stages in the business buying process, somewhat similar to what we see in the consumer buying process. You have that problem recognition, general need, product description, supplier search. In organizations, oftentimes they have to solicit proposals. So they may pick three or four vendors that all then need to solicit a proposal so they can make sure what they're comparing and making sure they're getting the best deal or best supplier for their organization. After those proposals have been delivered, they may have a supplier selection, and oftentimes that can even be a committee of people that go through that supplier selection, and then order those specifications. And oftentimes they'll even put in there some kind of performance review to look at and see how things are going. I've included in this chart, if it's a new task, you're going to go through every single phase. If it's a modified rebuy, you may go through some of them, but not others. And if it's a straight rebuy, you're not necessarily going to go through each of these stages. You're going to bypass all of those. But you would definitely do product specification, and you would want to look at a performance review just to make sure everything's still working for you and you're still happy with the selection that you've made. Okay, let's get into segmenting consumer markets. So when we look at market segmentation, we're looking at this entire population of potential consumers. Nobody targets every single consumer out there. And I think we talked about this before. It's too costly. So not even Coca-Cola is going to do that. They're going to have, if you ever go to the World of Coke, they have different Coca-Cola for different countries to go with the taste preferences of the consumers in that particular country. It's too hard to reach everybody, so we like to target a specific group of customers. So we take this total population that's available to us and we divide them into groups according to their similarities. So a market segment is a group of customers who share a similar set of needs and wants. This makes it easier for a company to communicate with them, create products for them, all the things that we do in marketing, set pricing, distribution. When we have consumers that have these similar needs and wants, we can be sure that the decisions that we're making regarding our products and our marketing strategies are going to be good for that group of people. So we have what we call segmentation variables. There are four that we look at as we start dividing these consumers and putting them in these groups. We have geographic segmentation, demographic segmentation, psychographics, and behavioral. Demographics tells us who the customer is. Psychographics tells us why they buy. Geographic looks at where they reside, and then behavioral tells us more about how they're going to buy that product. Not necessarily why, but how, like how often, what do they use it for, things of that nature. So when we look at demographic segmentation, almost every company targets based on demographics because it's the easiest one to fit a consumer into. And the US Census always does demographic information on consumer groups, but only every 10 years. So in 2020, we had our last US Census. So 2020, we had great information on our consumer groups. As the years wear on, that information becomes a little bit less reliable because consumer groups and consumers change. Cultures change, they get influenced by different things, people move, life stages change, all kinds of things like that. But demographics are easy to pinpoint. We can fit consumers into groups and our data can be categorized. It's really pretty much it can quantitatively be distributed. So as we look at what a demographic segmentation, what all would go into that, we look at age and life cycle stage of the consumer, life stage, gender, income, generation, race, culture. We might look at education level. We may look at income level. Oh, I've got that on there. So all of these things go about the demographic segmentation. They tell us who the consumer is. Psychographic segmentation tells us why they buy. We put buyers into groups on the basis of their psychological personality traits, their lifestyle, or their values. So all of these things help tell us why they buy the products. This information is more readily available now than it ever has been. We get data collected on us as consumers whenever we do anything, particularly if we're purchasing online. So there's a lot of information about us that's available to companies, and they use that information then to make their decisions about their messaging, their brand identity. It helps them decide on pricing and that distribution. So all of this psychographic information is available. We leave it a lot when we're doing anything in social media. Anything online is going to leave that sort of footprint for a company to follow and then be able to find and identify these consumers. When we look at psychographics, there's a company that does an analysis of lifestyles, and it's called VALS, Values and Lifestyles, and it's a segmentation system. And I believe it's not Claritas. Claritas does a different one. I'm trying to think who does the VALS system. I used to be able to have my students go in and actually take a little quiz, and then it would put them in the vowels segment where they fall in this framework. But they no longer, obviously, I wasn't the only marketing professor that did that. And so they banned colleges from having their students do it because it became burdensome to their system. But the VALS system looks at innovators and survivors. So there's two basic groups. There are people that have high resources and high innovation, and then low resources and low innovation. And we look at the primary motivation. So people can be motivated by ideals, by achievement, or self-expression. If you're high resource, high innovation, you'll fall and you look at ideals, you're what they target as a thinker. If you're achievement oriented and high resource, high innovation, you're an achiever. And if you're self expression, high resource, high innovation, you're going to be an experiencer. On the bottom level, low resource, low innovation, you're survivors, and you're going to be believers, strivers, or makers. And each of these then help us as as marketers really understand who these consumers are and why they make the purchase decisions they make. Companies, if I'm a company, I'm the marketer for a company and I need to have this information, I can buy this valve segmentation system and really dig deep to understand my consumers that I'm trying to market my products to. So this is really helpful getting in the mind of that consumer and looking at why they buy products the way they buy products. When we look at behavioral segmentation, then we divide buyers into groups based on their knowledge of the product, their attitude toward the product, how they use the product, or a response to a product. So a lot falls into like, think about loyalty reward points. I was working at the coffee bar this morning. We've had such an uptick in sales. We're way understaffed trying to hire and train new employees. So I went in to help this morning because Sunday mornings are crazy busy for us. And just looking at, we have a rewards points where people can get a certain they reach a certain tier and then they automatically get a percent off their purchase. People get free cookies. They get $5 off if they've used so many points. But it really keeps people coming back because I was surprised. I don't work in there all that often. I was surprised at how many people have reached a certain tier and now continually get a certain percent off of their purchase. So it keeps them coming back. Some guy said, "Yeah, I come in here way too much." And I looked at him, I smiled and said, "Well, I wouldn't say that. I don't know that you can come in too much because obviously I want him to come in every day and keep getting those points and getting those discounts." When we look at behavioral segmentation, part of it is needs and benefits. I already talked about attributes and benefits, but as consumers, we all want to know what's in it for us. And if you look at and think about your own purchasing situations, and particularly if you have a family, this is on the slide, you see a family. You have decision roles, just like we talked about with a business where you have decision roles in that business purchase decision. You have them in your family as well. Somebody may be an initiator. So, my son needed some new clothes for a school event. He initiated the purchase. Hey, mom, can we go get? And he needed a sport coat, some shoes, some dress shirts. He was the initiator. The influencer then was, his peer group, people that he looks up to. So maybe some social media influencers that he saw the way they dressed and he liked it. He and I both, I would say, were the deciders. So I would show him things that I liked, and he would decide what he liked out of those things. Ultimately, I was the buyer because I had the money, and then he will be the user. So, different decision roles within that buying situation based on the needs that he had and the benefits that he wanted from those products and the benefits that I wanted. I wanted things that looked good, that were going to be durable, that were within our budget. All of those things came into play. But within a family, you may have different people with these different roles. And the reason we look at that is we need to understand as companies how these decisions get made. What are the behaviors that these consumers are exhibiting, and how do we help them in that decision process through the marketing strategies that we employ? We also, within behavioral, look at the user and the actual usage related variables. So we may look at the usage rate of something that plays into my loyalty rewards, where I was talking about the consumer who said he came way too much, and you look at loyalty status, buyer readiness stage. Where are you in the buyer readiness stage? So on the example of taking my son to buy some clothes for the school function, this function is next week. So we were at DEF CON 5 buyer readiness stage. He had already looked at and thought about what he wanted. We're definitely ready to buy. We had attitudes about certain products, and we all go through that. And we have to look at the occasion. What are you buying it for? In my example, it was for a school function that he needed to have something. So every consumer goes through what we call the marketing funnel. And it is our job as marketers to help them at each stage of that funnel. Now, as you look at a particular market segment, you have to look at this whole bucket of customers that you want to target in that particular segment. All of them will not go through that funnel down to where they're actually a consumer. So you are creating marketing strategies at every stage of the funnel, hoping to bring them from the top of the funnel down to the bottom of the funnel where they use the product often and they buy the product. So here you see brand A and brand B. Consumers have become aware. They may or may not have tried that product yet. They go through a recent trial of the product. They become an occasional user. They may stay at that occasional user stage. What you want to do, though, is get them to regular user and then using it most often. And so you can see it's different for different brands, maybe in the same category of product, but a different brand, how those consumers go down through that marketing funnel. If we looked at segmenting business market, you would have demographics, you would have operational variables, you would look at the purchasing approaches, how a company goes through that purchasing process. There may be situational factors, and then definitely personnel characteristics. So some purchasing people in a department may prefer or like a different salesperson. May not be the product, it may be the personalities. And so you have to approach it professionally, but understand the needs of that particular buyer and what kind of things go into play. If there's a sales rep that has been there for a long, long time and they have a good established working relationship and the products are great, you as a sales rep are going to have a hard time getting in to change that dynamic. So it may have nothing to do with your sales style. It may have nothing to do with the products or the company that you're representing. It all can come down to those personal characteristics, definitely. So, as we look at steps in that segmentation process leading to our target marketing, you can have needs-based segmentation, segment identification, segment attractiveness, segment profitability, segment positioning. You may have a segment acid test where you create a segment storyboard to test the attractiveness of each segment's positioning strategy because you as a company may have segmented the market and you may have several different segments that you want to target. And then you might have a marketing mix strategy. You may expand your segment positioning strategy to include all aspects of your marketing mix, which ideally you definitely should do that. So, how do we decide which segment we're going to target? Well, you want a segment that is measurable. Yeah, you can measure the amount of consumers that are in it. It's substantial because remember that funnel, you're not going to be able to pull every consumer down to where they're purchasing that product. So you need a segment that is substantial enough that when you get down into the bottom of that funnel, you have enough consumers to actually have a business to be profitable. You want your segment, the consumers in your segment that you're picking to be accessible. How are you going to be able to reach out to them? You want one segment to be very different from another segment because that's going to help you with your messaging. It's going to help you with your pricing. It's going to help you with your distribution. If it's not that different from another segment, you might as well combine them actually. And then you want it to be actionable. If you do XYZ, you will get the results that you're looking for. So you want a segment that will act upon the marketing strategies you're going to employ. So, one of the things that we always have to look at is Porter's five forces. So, there's threat of intensive segment rivalry. I have definitely got that in the coffee market. I used to be the only coffee place in my town when I opened 12 years ago. Now I've got seven other coffee places. So, intense segment rivalry, all looking for the same consumer. So what I've done is I've gone even more niche than I originally had, and I'm really going after that discerning coffee connoisseur. The people that want that boutique experience that are kind of more coffee snobs and they're not just looking for a quick caffeine hit, but they're concerned about the quality of the coffee bean. They're concerned about the quality of the products going into their coffee, how that coffee's made, all of the things that the real attention to detail. Um, you have the threat of potential entrants. I've got that. There's definitely people that are still thinking about opening more coffee in my tiny little community. And then there's the threat of substitutes. One of the substitutes, which we also offer now at the coffee bar, there's a real matcha craze going on. But luckily, we do offer it at our coffee bar. But what if suddenly, a lot of people have gone to those energy drinks? We don't serve those, and I really don't want anything to do with those. But some of the other coffee bars in town have started offering those energy drinks. There's the threat of buyers' bargaining power, and that could definitely happen with coffee beans. And then the threat of suppliers bargaining power. So those things all come into play when you're looking at your strategies within the business buying behavior as well as consumer buying behavior. So, kind of the last thing we need to discuss is the four levels of segmentation. You could have full market coverage. Like I mentioned, nobody really does that because it takes tremendous amount of resources, not just people, but dollars. And how do you appeal to everybody? So, very few companies do full market. You could do, and I already talked to you about multiple segments. So I could say, okay, there's three real segments here. All three of them are very attractive to us. I may have different strategies for each of those segments, but I'm going to try and go after all of those segments. And then you could do a single segment specialization, what I just talked about, how I need to go really niche for my coffee bar. And then finally, you could do individual marketing. And some companies, service companies, actually do that. And we have the ability now with technology and digital assets to be able to direct our behavior towards a single individual consumer, which can be really helpful depending on the type of product you have. But you'll see some service organizations that actually do that, accountants, lawyers, sometimes healthcare, you'll see individual marketing is it can be very effective for that. All right, so those are all the things that you are going to need to know about. Obviously, it's much more in depth when you look at the chapters in your textbook. I do encourage you to read them, at least go through the headlines, look at the case studies, things of that nature that will really help bring this home to you and understand these concepts. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me and I will leave all of that information in an announcement in your course room.